Hey everybody, welcome back to College Conversation with me, Rick.
Hello, and me, Naeem.
And this young man, and I say young because he looks way younger than I am.
He definitely looks a lot better.
But the way he was talking and telling us earlier today,
Yeah.
he sounds like an old hat. I mean,
What?
with all the things, all the names.
Well, he's experienced a lot.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So he makes it seem like he's so much older. Maybe older in martial arts.
I just read a lot.
You read a lot.
I just a lot of reading.
This is Jason and I.
No, just Jason. Some random guy we met at Legacy 8 a few months ago.
I thought that was a funny meeting. I was really curious about your shirt. I'm like, I'm Jason. You're like, okay, we have a conversation. Then you go, do you know Jason and I? And I'm like, I am Jason and I.
and the way he goes, yeah, my name is Jason. I had no clue about Anai. I'm just thinking, okay, nice guy, right? And I'll tell you, this is the craziest part, even crazier than that.
What?
Because you had mentioned Sacramento.
Okay.
And in Sacramento, they have, of course, the gatherings, and that's Hunchy stuff.
Yeah.
And when we got invited there through Mike Ruby,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and he says, oh, yeah, you guys got to go to this. So, all right, me and Danny went. And we're walking around, and I see all these boards, and it says, oh, Jason and I, doing some stuff or whatever. I said, oh, yeah, that's cool. And who do I happen to run to other than a guy named Jason and I? And I'll tell you something. Because you come across as a hard ass when you're doing stuff.
Oh, when I'm teaching, I'm very serious.
Oh yeah, so I was like, damn, that guy's like, what the fuck, I was like, and then I come to meet him at the Legacy years later. That's why I didn't think it was you. I was like, because I didn't.
Yeah, it's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
I've taught in, I have had the fortune to teach for the last 30 years, the last 22 years. Internationally, right? Because my father passed, and I took over most of his teaching calendar because he was booked out for like 2-3 years. I quit my job and did all that stuff, so I've had the opportunity to teach, and I've been in rooms of just really serious military people. Like there's 3 people in a room, and this is my seminar. I've been with law enforcement, done all this stuff, and I just over time have modified my own personality while I'm teaching so that I can command the floor. Because the biggest ones are like in Europe in general, like Germany, would be 50, 80 people in there. Wow. Portugal, the one seminar I did there was 180 people in the room. Oh. So being able to command their attention, right?
In a different language with that.
Yeah, that was different. And I've eventually learned how to teach in, right and left and things like that in different languages just to be able to do that. So, but the point of the conversation of what we're talking about right now is I had to really learn to modify my teaching presentation and my presence on the floor, because if I come off as myself, people won't take me as seriously because I'm just joking around, or with my personal students. I've had students, I have a group in Germany that's been my students for 22 years, and they come from having been the head instructor there. She passed a few years ago, Simone. She's a lovely human being, and my father and myself both cared for her very deeply. But we've been teaching that group for 22 years, and then Simone had been my dad's student since 93 or 94. Right. So I'd known her from that point. And so with them, I can be like myself. Right. So, but with if I come into, a seminar, I did a seminar in Avignon, France, favorite city. I generally don't like Paris. I think Paris is there's just, I have to look down so I don't step on crap. And that's a big turnoff for me. I like animals, but I don't. But that's human crap, right?
Yeah. Big difference.
Right?
Okay.
So exactly the same. San Francisco is by far filthier than Paris, and that is saying a lot. Wow. That is saying a lot. In any event, I was teaching in Avignon, and nobody knows me there, so I got to be pretty serious. And then people come and be like, your technique doesn't work, and then you got to navigate that, That unfortunately in that particular situation I ended up breaking that guy's hand, but that was not intentional.
So people really do that. They go up to you like, oh, that doesn't work.
Sometimes it'll be it doesn't work. Sometimes it'll be, I'm gonna do it this way. Sometimes it's an outright, I don't think you know your stuff. And then other times they'll try to get a secret. They'll try to get a shot in on you. So if you're teaching, I remember one guy in Germany, he was doing something, and he's like, well, I don't know if I'm like, look, you can do it like this. And he goes, no, I don't think you can do it that way. I said, look, you have 3 choices here, right? And I go, you can follow along. Right. You can leave, or we can fight. Those are our three choices because I'm teaching a seminar. I'm a professional martial arts instructor. I can't have you dissenting with me in that. I won't get invited back. You're leaving me. You're not leaving me out, and I'm trying to be helpful and service you by trying to educate you on what I'm trying to teach. And maybe you ignore it because like seminars are as much infotainment as they are instructional.
Oh, definitely.
Right. So
Thank you for saying that. By the way,
that's okay. That's okay because like I never look at trying to. Get a new student from a seminar.
Right.
I'm never going to, well, that's not accurate. It's unlikely that I'm going to get a student from someone else's school as a seminar conductor, right?
And that's definitely not your goal.
No.
Right.
Occasionally this whole school will come. Occasionally the instructor will come and then add, occasionally there will be some people, but if that's my goal, I won't get invited back because now I'm poaching people's students. And my father had he was adamant about not doing it.
Before we go on, let's talk about that because you brought him up several times, and I've only known Jason and I, but now that I'm hearing what you're saying and you bring it up so often, he sounds like the lineage of like Leo Huron and all the older names, and I don't know how old your father, where he comes from in that sense.
He took credit lessons from them.
Really? Okay, so that is
so the Anayan lineage, if we're going from me to my dad, is from me to my dad, from my dad to Monong Angel, Monong Leo, and Monong Max.
Okay.
And then the West Coast Eskrima Society, and then Pressure Point Control Tactics as a martial arts or a law enforcement organization, and then another stage of development that occurred during an interaction with the Kilohana Martial Arts Association.
Yeah, because from what I understood all this time is that Anayan was a family
System, yeah.
It is.
right? That and I knew that it came from Stockton back in the days. And when I had heard that you guys were in San Jose, I goes, oh, they must have, I figured, okay, there was a migration from whatever. And then I would only hear about Jason and not your father. So I didn't know if you were actually the father of.
No.
And that's why. So that's why I wanted to get to this because
Junior.
Yeah. Well, that's just it, right? So I didn't know.
I'm a clone. No, like literally my mother, like I'm a clone. I walk like him, laugh like him. My intellectual process is very much like him. I mean, that's all due to like behavioral imprinting, right? So behavioral imprinting comes from birth to 7, right? And so I imprinted on my father. So a lot of my behaviors, mannerisms, thought processes, and logic and general perspective is very influenced by my father.
Wow.
Tempered by my mother.
Of
Right.
course.
Right, but a lot of I think that's probably the best way to put it too is that my father may have given me my edge, but my mother's the one that made me resilient.
So what do you feel
That's beautiful.
is the separation or what your dad took from Angel and those guys to turn it into a 9? I mean, was there a big difference, or did he keep it pretty much the same that it was taught, or did he say, no, some things have to change and let me do this and that, whatever?
That's a trick question.
Yeah.
The reason why it's a trick question, I mean, like there's a video of Vincent Cabales from like early 2014 or maybe early, I can't remember. We all went to the cemetery in Stockton and we're out there talking about the different masters. So obviously we go to Monong Leo's grave and Michael Huron speaks for his father, right? Mm-hmm. And we go to Monong Angel's grave and Vincent speaks for his father, right? Now, we go to Monong Max's grave, but there's no one to speak for Monong Max, right? And so I speak for Monong Max. And then we go to Monong Johnny Lacosta's, and that community doesn't really mix with the Inosano community. But I also, if you're talking about Anayan lineage now for me, I'm a student of my Uncle Danny's. I've been a student, my dad used to bring my Uncle Danny in to do seminars before he is as big as he is now. He was big then, but it was different then, like the way that they ran things. We had so like in the Anayan system of Eskrima, lineage-wise, you either learned in the backyard in Los Gatos, you learned, that's the first place, that's the 1970s, right, into the 1980s, and then the next big group, although there were some subgroups like at the apartment complex where my Uncle Frank DeFanti, they lived there,
Apartment complex,
right?
I like it.
They taught in the parking lot, right? They trained in there, right? but there was the
9 o'clock in the morning.
pretty much always the same, right? It's the old school, like old FMA is that way, but the Hill is the where a lot of the people that are teaching under my family name, not necessarily associated with me, but or my father, to that matter, if he was still alive, he wouldn't be associated with them either. But that generation is called the Hill, and that's up on Santa Cruz Mountain before the '89 earthquake,
Right.
and then Los Gatos would be at the house in Los Gatos Boulevard, which is down the street from here, and then there was a school from like maybe 89 to 93, something like that, and that was over here in Campbell. And so those are the generations, right? And so the people that learn, they learn from different ones. So my generation, I learned from the very beginning. When my dad was there, I was like 6, right? And then
Talk about imprint.
yeah, that's 1979, right? And then now we're at 2022, and the last 7-8 years since 2013, I've been training with my Uncle Danny. So the lineage goes it's interesting. Like if you go from my dad to Angel to DAZN to Villabro, and you go from me to my dad and my uncle to Angel and Villabro to Villabro. Right. So I kind of recursively, my lineage kind of loops back towards Villabro.
So is Villabro before Cabales?
Yes. Villabro, according to what my father taught me in history, as far as the history is concerned, was the protege or training partner of DAZN.
Oh.
Yeah. The arts are the same. In fact, the angle 12 is the same angle.
Right.
And you only see this angle 12 in Villabro, Largusa Cali, and Cerrado. I don't think that is in the Lightning Scientific, which is the other branch off from DAZN. I've not seen them do a double structure. Could be wrong. But I've not seen anything like that. So
we were with Nicholas Ilzra, guy from Lightning, Nickel, and he was he was at the seminar at one of the gatherings when it was in Circus, and he was teaching one of our students. The guy's gracious. I mean, really super nice guy. He said, "Yeah, sure, I'll show you." And he actually spent like almost about an hour just for shits and giggles, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, here."
Just got off to the side.
We were standing on the side by the bathrooms, and he was showing my kid this stuff. I'm like, "Wow, that's awesome!" And to look at him, and I didn't recognize anything that he was doing. I
recognize when I watch the Lightning Scientific, the stuff that I've seen, especially the guy John Escudero over in Israel. I believe he's in Israel, somewhere over there. I look at a lot of, and I see what the term I would use is cognates, but there's parallels, right, between the Sirada and that. The checking and some of the motions. It's different, but there's enough of it to be similar enough that it's, because like Cebuano Eskrima in general, right? So if we're just talking Cebuano Eskrima, that's going to be Doce Pares, right? It could be argued that Bikiti and Dikiti and Sayak are also Cebuano, or at least Visayan, right?
Don't tell that to Leo.
Manorai. Negros Occidental, which is where that comes from, which is my mother's side of the family comes from Negros Occidental. They're Visayan. That's
I agree, but I'm just saying.
Well, it's definitely not Tagalog, and it's definitely not Southern Philippines.
Nope.
Right, so you pick a box, right? I mean, it's just a label, anyways, right?
But those labels are eventually going to piss somebody off.
The thing is that I talk to people now, and I say, your teacher and your lineage is not what's behind your stick. It's your stick. And Mono Angel had that attitude.
Right.
He says, "Oh yeah, I show you my stick. That's my reputation."
Yeah.
Right. That was literally a sentiment, not verbatim word wise, but sentiment that Mono Angel was known for. I show you my stick, then we know. Right. That was his mentality. At least those are the stories that I knew him as a cool cat with the butterfly collar and the platform shoes and the bell bottoms, right? That's how I knew him, because I was like a kid. I was a little kid, right? But like his attitude and the stories and some of that color came through from my dad and my Uncle Jimmy telling me stories about them. But that I tell people now, I go, look, the thing is your lineage is not what people are looking for necessarily. If you're the instructor or if you're a student, you're looking for efficacy, and efficacy comes from an understanding of how physics work, how physiology works, how psychology works, and how geometry works. Those are the things, and it can come from any country.
Man, you do read a lot.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because the way you're saying this, right?
Yeah.
We happened to run into Ron Saturno.
Okay, Ron.
He
I know
he
Ron.
shows up in Reno,
Yeah, randomly.
right? And he's there, and I mean, he's a creeper. He just kind of pops in.
He comes in on the downline.
Yeah, he just.
Yeah, but he's not like.
I would say a hermit, not creepy, but okay.
Yeah, he comes in on the downline. Oh, I would say more like humble.
Yeah,
it's probably the
humble,
best way.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
very humble. Comes in on the quiet. But if you ask him a question, he's going to give you.
Oh
an
yeah,
answer.
and somebody said something to him. He goes, "Oh, why aren't you doing it the way this?" And what did he say?
He says, "My master's dead. I
Yeah,
can do whatever I want."
because they're
Not a direct quote, but essentially
Yeah,
that's what
I
he
mean-
was
I mean,
saying.
you got to remember that martial arts is seated in science in the sense of like you're playing with physics, in physics that are lethal. In other words, if you make a wrong calculation, you could lose something, including
Right.
your life, right? But at the same time, it is also an art because and that's probably because there's enough variability in the way that you can express a movement and have sound geometry and physics, and hopefully have the physiology to support that and the psychology to be okay with doing
You know
it.
Nick
right?
Morenos?
Wow.
Nicholas? You know Nicholas?
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, he's of the same mind that it's more about the science than it is about.
You have your artistic expression has to stay within the walls of relevant possibility and practicality, right?
Yes.
That's what has to stay within, and that's true whether I play music, if I paint,
Right.
and martial art.
Oh,
Which,
definitely,
in my opinion, martial arts is the most beautiful art. The only problem is that I can never really truly show this art because the art is the art of violence, right? In any event, and you being peaceful with that violence,
Right.
right?
Dead
So-
body, maimed,
Yeah, I mean,
eviscerated.
or it just leaves spiritually broken. I mean,
True.
there's a lot of that too, right? It depends on there's so many different kinds of fights. There's a guy that wants to fight you, but only wants to fight you if they think they can win. There's a guy that they're not fighting you, they're trying to kill you.
Right.
There's a guy that's trying to get away from you. There's a guy that's fighting you because you're fighting someone. Those are all different kinds of fights. And not every martial arts addresses that well, nor every practitioner or teacher. And most practitioner, teacher, artists don't have enough experience on all of those different kind of fights to really speak to.
And he and I talked about this, similar to this, in that we've always, or else at least I've always thought that instructors, when they're going in, depending who they are and where they came from, they're going to approach everything in such a different way that it almost makes it seem like, are you just making up your own stuff at this point? And do you just see it as, here's what I'm going to emphasize what I'm doing versus what everybody else had taught me or the things that I see? I mean, it always seems to me that the way we teach, right, we always say we teach the individual rather than the student or the class. Why? Because each student hears and understands everything different that I say to everybody as a group. At the individual guy, he gets it this way, he gets it way, and because of that, they start to develop their own mind to it. And then they go into their own emphasis of what they want to really, how they want to structure their classes from there on. I mean, do you get that is a legitimate statement?
Definitely. The way that I phrase that usually with my students is whatever you teach is not always what is learned, nor what is learned always what you have
I
taught.
love it. See, yes.
Right?
Yes,
And-
that's perfect.
Yeah, we're gonna use that quote now.
We're stealing that from Jason, just so everybody knows.
Fine.
So he's lending it to us.
No, I mean, the thing is I believe that a certain amount of open communication is useful if we're looking at this as a field of study. So in the 1550s, 1520s, when the Spanish civilized the Philippines, which wasn't called the Philippines at the time, was referred to as Los Hilos de los Pintados, however you want to put that, and brought the word of Christ to the Philippines, right? I mean, we already had metallurgy, we already had sauces in our foods, and we already had several different written forms of language, which are the three main indicators of an advanced society, right? So, but during that time, it's important to understand that gunpowder is becoming prevalent now in the Western world, Southern and Northern Europe. Obviously started in Asia, but it became prevalently used. Armor is changing, which changes the way that people fight. The people that came to colonize, if you will, the Philippines were conquistadors, which is the Spanish word for knights. The way that knightly orders work is that there was one Grand Master who was given a writ by the Pope to be able to bring the word of Christ and be under the church, right? So, and that comes with everything, the language, everything else, and all that stuff. And so we see the arts change because of that, right? And so we have to calculate that in our history, even though HEMA will tell us that we don't have a right to call our martial art HEMA, but we have the historical contiguous tradition that HEMA doesn't have. Not to say that HEMA doesn't work. HEMA totally works because it's just physics,
So explain
geometry, and all
HEMA
that
to
stuff.
some of the people out there who have no clue what that is, including me.
Historic European martial arts, right?
Okay.
So Filipino martial arts is heavily influenced by Spanish sword, right? Which, if you were in the 1550s, 1520s, when they're moving away from cut and thrust to the rapier and the dagger, the cloak and all those other things, and they moved away from the full body armor to maybe a breastplate, probably chain, things like that. And at the same time, the Philippines had brigandine armor, right? So they had bronze brigandine armor. You can find examples of that in different. They actually have it at the historical part for the University of St. Thomas.
Armor.
So it's like brass or bronze. Brigandine is. It's little metal plates that are connected by chains.
Right.
And the chalicos, they would have the vests made of it. Right? There's a bunch of different examples of it. So there is that there, right? But you see that change occur. And meanwhile, how did if you read the book Monks at War, they talk about first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh crusade, I think, right? And sixth and seventh is the Baltic Seas, right? First, second, and third, I think, is Latin Syria, which we call Israel, Jerusalem, all that stuff, the Middle East, right? And so on and so forth. But the way that they operate is, they set up a commandery, right? There's a bunch of half-brothers. The half-brothers are second, third, and fourth sons that will never get title or land from their family. So they go and their fathers buy them into the church, right? They donate to the church, and then they become half-brothers.
Right.
In German, they were called Habsbrüder, right? And then they would go to wherever they're going, and hopefully they could establish lands and gain titles and notoriety for themselves, and that was where you would see the offshooting heraldry if you're practicing it. That
like a family franchise.
That history and that modus operandi transfers to the Philippines. You see that happen in the Philippines. Okay. Interestingly enough, the greatest of the conquistadors, Cortez here in California, as an example, right? Were all mostly like Andalusian or Boscaneros. They weren't actually Castilian Spanish, right? And so you see some of that history, but that's a sidebar, right?
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, that's what we see, and that's what influenced the Filipino martial arts. So you have Southeast Asian influence, right? And a lot of this history comes from my Uncle Dan in Asano. His last name is Italian, right? Which is kind of what I'm getting to, right? So you see a aristocracy form of sword play, right? Which is what HEMA is mostly, right? Whereas common men at arms were taught a different form of sword and buckler style. Right. And this is what we see in Filipino martial arts. But if you knew your stuff, Espada Dago was the thing, which is also the form of the aristocracy. And it was the Tagalogs that were taught that more often than not, because they were the ones that rose to power under the Spanish. Right. They were light-skinned, right? And they were educated. Rizal's a good example of that person, right? Who had a fencing school in Paris at one point, right? Wow. So they were educated, and they were treated slightly differently as mestizos, right? So that history is important for us to understand, because it wasn't just the Spanish. Because while the Spanish galleon comes in, Magallanes, or Magellan as we call him, right, was Portuguese, right? And his sailors were just European, not Spanish. It was funded by the Spanish, but not just Spanish. But when the actual conquistadors came in, that's going to be more of the Grand Master, the Master at Arms, the Master of Coin, the Master of Horse, and all stuff. These are the different masters. These are different knights that are in charge of different things.
Right. Then it's the cultural invasion that happened versus the physical invasion of it.
Yeah, you could look at a cultural invasion, but the thing is once it gets past 200 years, is a cultural. It's more of a cultural melding at that point, right? Like, okay. You have to accept your because you can't change 350 years of influence, right?
No, not at all.
Right, and that's a contention that my Uncle Dan had with the West Coast Eskrima Society, and that my dad's was a big part of that organization. Max Sarmiento was Grandmaster Max Sarmiento. My dad's teacher was a part of that, and they were trying to do things to make it more Filipino. Like they're part of the reason why, especially specifically as I understand it, you don't start seeing like the alibata that you have in your logo or the
Right.
Baibayin, right? You don't see that occurring in Filipino martial arts logos until the 1970s.
Right.
That's when my dad and my uncle Dan were working with a scholar at the UC Hayward, UC East Bay,
Yeah.
who had information and brought that in, right? And so whether or not they discovered it or either reintroduced it into popular culture or not, as popular as Filipino martial arts, which is really the redheaded stepchild of the martial arts world, right? Even though we're like, all the movies, right? We're in all the movies, but like they don't
acknowledge it.
it's jujitsu or something else, right?
Ancient Chinese art,
right,
but it's Filipino martial.
It's on the Dragon Scrolls, right? Right? But so you see all this history, and that's where Filipino martial arts is it's like I have a buddy of mine. He says there's no such thing as a pure blooded Filipino. I'm like, you're right. You're totally right. You're totally right.
So well, even further back than the 1600s, you had the Majipaji and all those other people who migrated to what is now, or what then later becomes the Philippines. They were already there. They were the indigenous who actually came from somewhere else.
That's all part of the Austronesian diaspora.
Right.
Yeah. So,
it's funny. You're right. We are not pure by any. I mean, if you look at all the last names, Lims, and all these other, different,
didn't exist until
until everybody
Spanish,
came over. I mean,
they named it after Prince Philip, who then became king.
Right. So
so all of these things tells you.
You could argue there are pure Filipinos because that's when the Philippines started.
Yeah.
Well, you could argue it that way, but if you're talking about indigenous, probably the
no.
only indigenous are the Negritos, and they're still pretty pure, but not completely, not culturally pure anymore.
No.
Right, but they're pretty. They don't really.
Especially when you see them with T-shirts that says rocker.
Yeah, they don't really commingle necessarily.
No,
they don't intermarry very much.
Yeah,
Really?
and it's funny because if you go to
there's still there are some of the tribes from my reading. Some of the tribes are interacting with other natives of the Philippine Islands now.
Okay.
But as far as there are some tribes that are still pretty,
Yeah, when we were in the
secluded.
Philippines, we visited a couple of the islands like Palau and all, and sure enough, they're showing these people. Oh yeah, we got these people from the mountains, and they're here showing their craft, and it's like, wow, this is disgusting, because they actually brought them out from where they're from, like you said, they
Like a show.
Yeah, and they have them perform.
Let me parade you.
I was like, wow, really? You guys are doing this? I was a little embarrassed by it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a certain kind of commercialism that is
Right.
to be
Zoo.
not exactly lauded by the Filipino culture in general.
Right. I was
Right.
like, dude, really? Why are we?
I mean, look at the way how unsafe it is to be in Manila.
Right.
Like you get in a jeepney, you're sitting next to a guy, and there's a guy crashing, and they're all three going to mug you.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do.
So I'll tell you a crazy story. Right, one of my good friends, he's in a taxi in Manila, and he asked the guy, "Oh, bring me over here." And the guy's from there, but he was living in the States for a long time. He goes back, still knows where everything is. Taxi guy's driving along, pulls up to like this, it's nighttime, of course. Guy pulls up, it looks like he's waiting for somebody, right? My friend's like, pulls out his pen and goes, "Dude, if I don't get out here alive, you're gonna die first." Because that's literally things that happen.
Wow.
That's a scary thought.
Well, it goes along with an idea. So like I'm training. So what happened was my dad dies in 2000, and I went to my uncle Danny's 70th birthday party, I think it was. Then he did a cartwheel. He did 2 or 3 cartwheels at that time, right? He's like 85 now, right? But
Was he sober doing cartwheels?
no, yeah, of course. So
on the cartwheels.
I gave him a birthday present and stuff like that, and he's like, "You need to come and train." But I wasn't out of place because of my personal life was not it's still in disarray because of my father passing, even though it had been many years after my father. You never really get over that kind of stuff, right? It just gets easier to deal with, right? But eventually, fast forward to 2013, I'm finally in a place where I can take on a teacher,
Right.
Because like with my dad, it was like, "You say, I do."
Yeah,
Right?
there was no more.
That was the way I was brought up, and that's the way when I accept a teacher. Like I had the fortune to learn from Sifu Abrasi as well, right? Who taught the Bada Scream. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right?
I've seen some of it.
Yeah. So I'm worked with him for a while to the point where he's like, "You're going to be an elder in my community." And I'm like, "I've only been with you for like a year, man. I'm not sure, but okay, I will be if I can help, I can help." But anyways,
People just throw titles at you, huh?
No, just an elder. It's just like meaning that I can help.
Oh,
I'm not an
okay.
instructor or anything like that. Just,
I wasn't sure
just
if
help.
it
Just
meant
help.
something else.
right? But you know, like if a teacher says do this, and
Right.
and C4 basically used to call me like at least once a week and check in on me, make sure I was doing okay and stuff
Oh,
like that,
wow.
right? But like, so at this time with my Uncle Danny, I was like, okay, I can take a lesson, I can do this, and he's like, okay, good, but you already know everything. I'm like, no, I don't. He goes, yeah, it's all right. You're gonna do this stuff, and so I'm like, I'm here to learn the college, and I'm mostly there for the history. I want to know the history, right? Because he's just a treasure.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Yeah, I've seen
And so
that.
all the
His
stories,
Smithsonian thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Smithsonian
Yeah.
lecture he did. Oh,
The
yeah.
best part is that being in the instructor organization, he gives you his book list.
Oh, wow.
So he'll mention a book, you just make sure you write it down, you have your phone out, you're doing Amazon, you're like, save for later, right? So that you can read it, right? Like he recommends a book called